My dear Divyavani viewers, welcome to the Word of God program. In the last two talks, I gave some details about the new year, the new calendar that was introduced at various stages, especially the last one introduced by the Pope Gregory, and that is known as the Gregorian calendar, which is the one that we even now use. It is not all over the world the same. There is a Julian calendar which is still being used by some people in some areas. In the calendar, I explained how the new year, the calend, was calculated from the day the consul or king took charge, and that was the way the Roman calendar calculated, whereas we now have a fixed calendar with the January 1st as the New Year day. About January, the month of January, I gave the details why that name is given to the first month and so on. They are not so important, but it is good to know that these things are in use, and therefore there are important things that are to be taken into consideration. At one stage, an year had only 10 months, and even the names of the months that we use now are still continuing to have the same number or name. I gave the examples of September, October, November and December, and they are all simple numbers in Latin. The interesting thing is about the special care given to what is called calend, a word that simply refers to the first day of, let us say, the consul or the king. There are solar months and lunar months. There are also important days in the year like the solstice and the equinox. All that I explained in the last two talks, and they had some significance. In some areas they still refer to the solstice or equinox days as the beginning of the new year. In any case, at present, for us, it is the Gregorian calendar that was introduced in the 16th century, and that is what is being used. And there the year is calculated almost precisely with the time, and in order to make adjustment, we have the once in 4 years, 1 day added to the year, that leap year. And even for the century years, there are various calculations that have been introduced. All that very briefly I presented to you. Today and in the next talk, I would like to give some details about, first of all, details about Bethlehem itself, and then the importance of the day that we consider as Epiphany. For us, Epiphany is the day the wise men visited Jesus, baby Jesus. And there are many areas where Epiphany is considered as Christmas, because that is the time Jesus manifested himself as the Savior to those people. And therefore, They do not have another Christmas as we have. They have only Epiphany, and that is Christmas. In order to understand the importance of Epiphany and the importance of Bethlehem, I will present to you some historical background of the small town called Bethlehem. Everybody knows that we consider Bethlehem as the place where Jesus was born, that is given in the Bible. Bethlehem is about 8 kilometers south of Jerusalem. Earlier it was called Bethlehem Ephrat or Bethlehem Ephrata, which means fruitful. Bethlehem, the name Bethlehem itself means house of bread. Bethlehem stood in fertile countryside, which made its name a fitting one. The area was fertile, and therefore it was actually the bread basket of that area. The Bethlehem that we refer to as the birthplace of Jesus is called Bethlehem of Judah. It is from the tribe to which it belonged. This we have to distinguish from the Bethlehem of Galilee, which belonged to the tribe of Zebulun. So there are two Bethlehems, but ours is Bethlehem of Judah, and that is where Jesus was born. Bethlehem has a very long history. It was there that Jacob had buried Rachel and had set up a pillar of memory beside her grave. This is given in Genesis chapter 48, verse 7, and then also chapter 35, verse 20. I will read 48:7. I am doing this because of your mother Rachel. To my great sorrow, she died in the land of Canaan, not far from Ephrat, as I was returning from Mesopotamia. I buried her there beside the road to Ephrat. Ephrat is now known as Bethlehem. Genesis chapter 35, verses 19-20 has this. When Rachel died, she was buried beside the road to Ephrat, now known as Bethlehem. Jacob set up a memorial stone there, and it still marks Rachel's grave to this day. So from the early time onwards, there are records of this particular small town. There are various other events connected with Bethlehem. For example, Ruth chapter 1 verses 22. It was there that Ruth had lived when she married Boaz. I will read 122. This then was how Naomi came back from Moab with Ruth, her Moabite daughter-in-law. The barley harvest was just beginning when they arrived in Bethlehem. And from Bethlehem, Ruth could see the land of Moab, her native land, across the Jordan Valley. So it was so near to her hometown. But above all, Bethlehem was the home and the city of David. 1 Samuel 16:1 has this, I read, The Lord said to Samuel, How long will you go on grieving over Saul? I have rejected him as king of Israel. But get some olive oil and go to Bethlehem to a man named Jesse, because I have chosen one of his sons to be king. In 1 Samuel 17:12, I read, David was the son of Jesse, who was an Ephraimite from Bethlehem in Judah. Jesse has 8 sons, and at the time Saul was king, he was already a very old man. 1 Samuel 26 says this, If your father notices that I am not at table, tell him that I begged your permission to hurry home to Bethlehem, since it is the time for the annual sacrifice there for my whole family. So, interestingly, all these events are in the Bible, that these events actually narrate about Bethlehem and show the importance of Bethlehem already from very old. There is another incident about David. It was for the water of the well of Bethlehem that David longed when he was hunted a fugitive upon the hills. It's in 2 Samuel 23:14 to 15. We'll pause for a while. We'll come back very soon. Welcome back. I was very briefly telling you the old history of Bethlehem, how Bethlehem is mentioned in the Bible with various people, and that gives us an idea of the greatness of this small town. I mentioned about the event where King David longed for the waters of Bethlehem when he was a fugitive on the hills. That is in 2 Samuel 23 verses 14 and 15. I will read. At that time, David was on a fortified hill, and a group of Philistines had occupied Bethlehem. David felt homesick and said, How I wish someone would bring me a drink of water from the well by the gate at Bethlehem. In later days, we read that Rehoboam fortified the town of Bethlehem. That is in 2 Chronicles chapter 11, verses 5 and 6. Rehoboam remained in Jerusalem and had fortifications built for the following cities of Judah and Benjamin, Bethlehem, Etam, Tekoa, and so on. But in the history of Israel and in the minds of the people of Israel, Bethlehem was uniquely the city of David. It was from the line of David that God was to send the great deliverer of his people. As the prophet Micah had it, But you, O Bethlehem of Ephrathah, who are one of the little clans of Judah, from you shall come forth for me one who is to rule Israel, whose origin is from of old, from ancient days. I read from Micah chapter 5 verse 2. It was in Bethlehem, David's city, that the Jews expected great David's greater son to be born. It was there that they expected God's anointed one to come into the world, and it was so. The picture of the stable and the manger as the birthplace of Jesus is a picture indelibly etched in our minds. But it may well be that that picture is not altogether correct. Justin Martyr, one of the greatest of the early fathers, who lived about 150 AD and who came from the district near Bethlehem, tells us that Jesus was born in a cave near the village of Bethlehem. Justin Martyr, who has written the dialogue with Trypho, I quoted from Numbers 78 and 304. And it may well be that Justin's information is correct. The houses in Bethlehem are built on the slope of the limestone ridge, and it is very common for them to have a cave-like stable hollowed out in the limestone rock below the house itself. And very likely it was in such a cave stable that Jesus was born. To this day, such a cave is shown in Bethlehem as the birthplace of Jesus, and above it is the Church of the Nativity that has been built afterwards. For a very long time, that cave has been shown as the birthplace of Jesus. It was so in the days of the Roman Emperor Hadrian, who in a deliberate attempt to desecrate the place, erected a shrine to the heathen god Adonis above it. When the Roman Empire became Christian early in the 4th century, that is, Emperor Constantine, who received baptism somewhere in 315 or so, his conversion was due to the influence of his mother, great Saint Helena. And when he was converted, he made all the arrangements to send away all the other wives except one, and each wife was given property worthwhile. And Helena actually encouraged all these. Her movement, her activities were really great at that time. So the early part of the 4th century, from 313 onwards, there were really great movements within the church. The first thing was Constantine gave freedom to the Christians to practice the religion they liked. That was by an edict called the Edict of Milan, which was promulgated in the year 313. With that, the Christians were first of all free. Secondly, they got back whatever property they lost during the persecutions. With that, the persecutions ended. The Christians began to live happily and freely. They began to build up their own life, and there were leaders to guide them. There was Saint Helena to encourage them in every way. Helena also visited the Holy Land. She went to the Holy Land in search of the true cross, which was also a great event. She went and searched for the true cross, and finally she got it. Through a miracle, she could make sure that that is the true cross, and Then she sent pieces of that cross to the various churches and communities all over the world. A lot of other things about this particular event perhaps I will explain on some other occasion, but it is worth noting that Saint Helena was actually a great figure in this regard. One of the wives of Constantine, her name is Fausta, who had inherited a huge palace, and that was in Lateran in Rome, and that palace she donated to the Pope to use it as his residence. And from that time onwards, for almost till the 16th century, that was the official residence of the Pope. Many councils took place there, and many other great incidents and events took place in Lateran. All that just because that great lady donated her property to the Pope, who used it as his official residence. The Basilica of Lateran was actually developed in a couple of years as a part of the palace, the Lateran Palace. And that event also made the Christian community happy and strong. Part of the Lateran Palace was converted into a basilica, and in that way, that great building became so famous all over the world because that was the residence of the Pope, and that was the greatest church of the Christians. This particular basilica that was converted actually from the palace of Fausta, that church actually was the center of Christianity itself for certainly almost 1,000 years and more. The Pope moved from there to his new residence in the Vatican only in the beginning of or the early part of the 16th century. This Basilica of Lateran was the center of Christian life itself. That particular basilica was partly destroyed in the Samaritan revolt of the 6th century. The present church was then renovated and built in the year 530 by Justinian. From the exterior, it looks like a fortress. The entrance is low and narrow, and in order to protect it from the Muslim invaders, to prevent them from entering on horseback. This is the way the Church of the Nativity was protected. Thank you for listening. We will take up another episode in